Steve McQueen wasn't just a movie star, he was the embodiment of effortless cool. With his rugged charm, rebellious spirit, and unforgettable roles in films like Bullitt, The Great Escape, and The Magnificent Seven, he became one of Hollywood's most iconic figures. But behind the scenes, McQueen's intensity, ego, and relentless need for dominance created tension that few could ignore. He clashed with some of the biggest names in the industry, turning film sets into battlegrounds for control and attention. From James Garner's brutally honest take on his talent to Yul Brynner's on-set power struggle and his legendary rivalry with Paul Newman, McQueen's relationships were as fiery as his performances. Was he a misunderstood genius or simply impossible to work with? In this video, we uncover the truth about Hollywood's king of cool, his feuds, his rivalries, and the untold stories that shaped his legacy. Steve McQueen's journey to Hollywood superstardom was anything but conventional. Before he became the face of action-packed cinema, he was a struggling actor trying to make a name for himself. His breakthrough came in the late 1950s with Wanted, Dead or Alive, a hit TV western that showcased his effortless, cool, and quiet intensity. But television wasn't enough. McQueen had his sights set on the big screen. And when Hollywood finally took notice, he didn't just step into stardom, he seized it. What made McQueen different was his choice of roles. He wasn't drawn to traditional heroes or romantic leads. Instead, he embodied characters that were rough around the edges. Loners, rebels, men of few words but undeniable presence. Films like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape cemented his status. But it was Bullitt that made him a legend. With that film's now iconic car chase, McQueen didn't just play a tough, no-nonsense cop, he became the very definition of cool. But McQueen wasn't just tough on screen. He brought that same attitude to the set, and it often rubbed people the wrong way. He had an intense need to be in control, a relentless desire to make sure he was the center of attention in every shot. He studied the camera angles, counted his lines, and even insisted on reworking scripts if he felt his character wasn't strong enough. His co-stars and directors quickly learned that working with McQueen meant dealing with his unshakable determination to have things his way. He also had a deep-seated competitiveness that went beyond friendly rivalry. It was personal. If another actor had a great moment in a scene, McQueen would find a way to one-up them. If someone else had more dialogue, he'd push for script changes. He wasn't interested in being part of an ensemble. He wanted to be the star. That made him a force to be reckoned with, but it also made him difficult to work with. Perhaps one of the most telling critiques of McQueen came from James Garner, one of Hollywood's most respected and easygoing actors. Garner had a simple but cutting opinion of McQueen's abilities. He wasn't an actor, just a movie star. To Garner, acting wasn't about striking a pose or cultivating an image. It was about disappearing into a role. But McQueen didn't disappear. He imposed himself. No matter what film he was in, he always played a version of himself. The quiet, brooding, rebellious loner. It was a persona that audiences loved, but to seasoned actors like Garner, it was a limitation. That distinction between being a true actor and just a star was what fueled so much of the tension McQueen had with his peers. He had a natural screen presence, an undeniable charisma, but he didn't approach his craft with the same dedication to transformation that many of his contemporaries did. While actors like Marlon Brando and Paul Newman studied their roles, exploring layers of character psychology, McQueen was more concerned with how his character looked, how cool he came across. And that rubbed some actors the wrong way. Still, despite his clashes with co-stars, there was no denying McQueen's impact. He didn't just act, he defined an era of filmmaking. He was the lone wolf, the anti-hero, the guy who could say more with a single glance than others could with an entire monologue. Whether he was difficult, demanding, or even selfish on set, the results spoke for themselves. He was a box office draw, a Hollywood powerhouse, and the man everyone wanted to be, both on and off the screen. But for all his success, McQueen's refusal to play by the rules meant that tension followed him wherever he went. And as his career progressed, so did his list of enemies. Some saw him as a visionary, others saw him as a stubborn egomaniac. Either way, one thing was certain: Steve McQueen wasn't just another actor. He was a force of nature. And that force didn't always sit well with those who had to share the screen with him. In 1963, The Great Escape brought together some of Hollywood's most charismatic actors, including James Garner and Steve McQueen. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Garner played the smooth, resourceful Hendley, while McQueen was the rebellious, thrill-seeking Hiltz. But off-screen, things weren't so smooth. While the film became a classic, tensions between its two biggest stars were just as memorable as the movie itself. James Garner was known as one of Hollywood's most easygoing actors, respected by nearly everyone he worked with. He was professional, collaborative, and had little patience for on-set drama. McQueen, on the other hand, was a different story. He wasn't just acting in The Great Escape. He was fighting to dominate every scene he was in. And that made things complicated. Garner had a brutally honest take on McQueen's approach to acting. In his eyes, McQueen wasn't really an actor. He was just a movie star. To Garner, a true actor could disappear into any role, making audiences believe they were someone entirely different each time. McQueen, however, didn't do that. No matter what character he played, he was always some version of Steve McQueen, the tough, silent, lone wolf. Audiences loved it, but to Garner, that wasn't acting. It was just playing the same role over and over again. That's why he summed up McQueen's approach in 4 words: the kiss of death. The tension between them wasn't just about acting styles, it was also about McQueen's behavior on set. During filming, McQueen grew frustrated with how his character was written. He felt Hiltz wasn't heroic enough, that he was being overshadowed by the ensemble cast. And when McQueen wasn't happy, everyone knew it. He threatened to quit the movie entirely unless changes were made to his role. The production was suddenly in a tough spot. McQueen was the film's biggest draw, but he was also its biggest headache. The director, John Sturges, had to find a way to keep him satisfied without compromising the story. In the end, McQueen got what he wanted. His character was rewritten to be more of a heroic lone wolf, and the famous motorcycle escape sequence, one of the most iconic moments in the film, was added specifically to showcase him. But even after getting his way, McQueen continued to be difficult. He was constantly worried about being upstaged by his co-stars. At one point, he even refused to shoot scenes where he wasn't the clear focal point. It wasn't just about playing a great character, it was about making sure he looked better than everyone else. Despite all the drama, James Garner somehow managed to maintain a friendship with McQueen. While many of McQueen's co-stars grew to resent him, Garner had a different approach. He didn't take McQueen's antics personally. He understood that beneath the tough guy persona was someone deeply insecure about his place in Hollywood. Unlike McQueen, Garner didn't need to prove himself. He was already comfortable in his own skin. In the years that followed, Garner remained one of the few people in Hollywood who had no real bitterness toward McQueen. He may not have respected his approach to acting, but he recognized McQueen's undeniable screen presence. While others saw an egotistical movie star, Garner saw someone who was simply trying to carve out his own space in an industry full of competition. Their relationship was complicated, but it was also one of the rare instances where McQueen found someone who could tolerate his relentless drive for dominance. And in a career filled with feuds and rivalries, that in itself was no small feat. In 1960, two Hollywood powerhouses collided on the set of The Magnificent Seven. On one side was Yul Brynner, an Oscar-winning actor known for his commanding presence, deep voice, and signature bald head. On the other was Steve McQueen, a rising star hungry to prove himself. What started as a professional collaboration quickly spiraled into a full-fledged rivalry, one that would become legendary in Hollywood history. At the time, Brynner was the undisputed star of the film. He had already made his mark in The King and I and the Ten Commandments, establishing himself as one of the most respected actors in the business. McQueen, however, was still on the rise. He had gained recognition from Wanted, Dead or Alive. But The Magnificent Seven was his big break, his chance to show the world that he was more than just a TV cowboy. And he wasn't about to let anyone, not even a Hollywood giant like Brynner, steal the spotlight from him. McQueen quickly made it his mission to stand out in every scene, even when he wasn't supposed to be the center of attention. If Brynner had a monologue, McQueen would find a way to divert the audience's focus, flipping a coin, adjusting his hat, or casually loading and unloading his shotgun. He wasn't just acting, he was playing a psychological game, using subtle but deliberate moves to make sure all eyes were on him. Brynner noticed immediately, and he wasn't amused. Furious that McQueen was trying to upstage him, he took drastic action. He reportedly issued a direct order. McQueen was not allowed to make any unscripted movements while they shared the screen. But if Brynner thought a simple directive would stop McQueen, he underestimated just how determined his co-star was. McQueen took the challenge as an opportunity to push back even harder. One of McQueen's most infamous tricks was his deliberate sabotage of Brynner's on-screen presence. Brynner, aware of his slightly shorter stature compared to some of his co-stars, would often stand on small mounds of dirt to appear taller in key shots. McQueen, knowing this, made a habit of subtly kicking the dirt away whenever Brynner wasn't looking. It was a small act of defiance, but it had a huge impact. Each time Brynner stepped into position, he found himself sinking just a little lower, forcing him to constantly readjust while McQueen smirked in satisfaction. Tensions between the two actors boiled over in a very public confrontation. According to multiple accounts, there was a moment on set when Brynner, finally fed up with McQueen's antics, grabbed him by the shoulder in anger. It was a rare display of aggression from Brynner, who was usually composed and professional. But McQueen, always the rebel, shrugged it off with his signature cool. He later speculated that Brynner felt threatened, not just by McQueen's presence in the film, but by the fact that McQueen could ride horses and handle guns far more naturally than he could. Their feud became Hollywood legend, a story that was passed down for decades. And yet, despite all the tension and mind games, both men delivered unforgettable performances. Their rivalry may have been fueled by ego and competition, but it ultimately added to the energy of the film, turning The Magnificent Seven into one of the greatest westerns of all time. Even after the movie wrapped, McQueen never had much respect for Brynner. He once bluntly stated, "We didn't get along," but while the two never became friends, their on-screen clashes made history, proving that sometimes real-life rivalries can create cinematic magic. Steve McQueen and Paul Newman were two of the biggest names in Hollywood during the 1960s and 70s. Both were ruggedly handsome, immensely talented, and had an effortless cool that made them icons of their era. But despite their similarities, or perhaps because of them, their relationship was fueled by tension, competition, and an unspoken rivalry that extended far beyond the movie screen. For McQueen, Newman represented everything he wanted to be: a respected actor, a box office draw, and a Hollywood favorite. But while Newman built his career through versatility and methodical dedication to his craft, McQueen relied more on instinct and presence. Where Newman was polished and refined, McQueen was raw and rebellious. And that contrast only deepened the divide between them. Their rivalry wasn't just about acting, it carried over to their shared passion for racing. Both men were deeply involved in motorsports, competing in professional events, and even dreaming of racing full-time. But their approaches were vastly different. Newman was disciplined, patient, and committed to honing his skills over time. McQueen, on the other hand, relied on natural talent and a fearless, aggressive driving style. It infuriated McQueen that Newman, despite coming into racing later in life, was earning just as much respect, if not more, than he was on the track. Their tension came to a head when McQueen was offered a role alongside Newman in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was the perfect setup: two of Hollywood's biggest stars sharing the screen in what would become an instant classic. But there was a problem: billing. Newman, being the bigger name at the time, was set to receive top billing. McQueen refused to place second to anyone, not even Newman. He demanded equal placement, and when producers didn't budge, he walked away from the film entirely. In the end, Robert Redford took the role, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid became one of the defining films of the era, without McQueen. But the rivalry didn't end there. A few years later, both actors finally appeared in the same film, The Towering Inferno, a massive blockbuster featuring an all-star cast. While the film itself was a success, behind the scenes, it was a battlefield. McQueen, still unwilling to let Newman outshine him, meticulously counted the number of lines each of them had in the script. When he discovered Newman had more, McQueen demanded and received additional dialogue to even the score. But it wasn't just about the number of lines. Both men used sneaky tactics to steal the spotlight. McQueen would slightly shift his positioning in scenes to ensure the camera focused on him. Newman, aware of the game, made sure he always had the best angles. Every moment on screen became a quiet war for dominance, with neither man willing to concede an inch. For Newman, McQueen's obsession with competition felt unnecessary and childish. A lifelong friend of Newman later revealed that the actor privately referred to McQueen as a chicken for his constant grievances over billing, screen time, and dialogue. Unlike McQueen, Newman didn't need to prove himself. He let his work speak for itself. Despite their rivalry, both men left behind legendary careers. McQueen's rebellious spirit and raw charisma made him an icon, while Newman's versatility and effortless charm cemented him as one of Hollywood's all-time greats. Their feud was never publicly explosive, but behind the scenes, it was one of the most intense competitions in Hollywood history. A silent battle between two of the biggest names to ever grace the silver screen. Steve McQueen wasn't just a movie star, he was a force of nature. He brought an unmatched intensity to every role, but that same intensity made him one of the most difficult actors to work with. His obsession with control, his relentless need to be the center of attention, and his refusal to compromise made him a nightmare for directors and co-stars alike. One of McQueen's biggest demands throughout his career was ensuring that every character he played was heroic. If a script portrayed his character as vulnerable or secondary to another actor, he would push for rewrites until the role aligned with his tough guy image. This constant interference slowed down productions, frustrated filmmakers, and often forced entire movies to be reshaped just to satisfy his ego. On the set of The Great Escape, for example, McQueen nearly walked away from the film because he felt his character wasn't given enough heroic moments. The production team scrambled to appease him, adding the now famous motorcycle chase to showcase his daring, rebellious side. In The Magnificent Seven, he constantly upstaged Yul Brynner, using subtle tricks to divert the audience's focus. And in The Towering Inferno, he counted every line of dialogue, ensuring that he had just as much screen time as Paul Newman. But McQueen's need to dominate didn't just affect scripts, it also affected his relationships. Many of his Hollywood peers resented working with him, and while some actors could tolerate his antics, others outright refused to work with him again. His reputation for being difficult extended beyond just his co-stars. Directors and producers frequently clashed with McQueen over his insistence on controlling how his characters were portrayed. He would demand script changes, challenge camera angles, and even delay shoots if he felt something wasn't working in his favor. To him, every film was a battle, not just to create a great movie, but to cement his image as Hollywood's ultimate tough guy. This relentless drive to control his narrative came at a cost. While McQueen remained a box office draw, his reputation behind the scenes made him a liability. Studios hesitated to cast him in ensemble films because they knew he wouldn't share the spotlight. Directors dreaded working with him because they knew he would challenge every decision. Even producers, who recognized his star power, had to weigh whether dealing with his demands was worth the payoff. Despite all this, McQueen's star power never faded. He had something that few actors possessed, an authenticity that audiences connected with. No matter how difficult he was off-screen, people couldn't take their eyes off him when he was on it. He wasn't just an actor, he was a persona, a symbol of rebellion and independence. But as his career went on, his unwillingness to compromise caught up with him. The industry changed, and the tolerance for his behavior started to wear thin. While his talent was undeniable, so was the frustration that came with working with him. His legacy is one of brilliance and controversy, a man who lived by his own rules but often found himself at odds with those who had to work alongside him. In the end, McQueen's story is as complex as the characters he played. He was a legend, a Hollywood rebel, and a man who left behind a trail of unforgettable performances, and just as many burned bridges. Even after his death in 1980, Steve McQueen's legacy remained as powerful and as controversial as ever. His image, his name, and everything associated with him became a valuable commodity, sparking legal battles and disputes that would last for decades. While he had spent his life fiercely guarding his reputation as the ultimate Hollywood rebel, his estate would have to fight just as hard to protect his name from unauthorized use and exploitation. One of the biggest battles centered around companies trying to profit off McQueen's legendary status without permission. His rugged, cool persona made him a perfect fit for advertising, and soon, brands began using his likeness to sell products, from clothing to cars and beyond. But his estate wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Lawsuits were filed against corporations that attempted to use his name, face, and legacy to market their products without authorization. One of the most infamous cases involved Ferrari. The luxury car manufacturer attempted to name a special edition model after McQueen, banking on his well-documented love of racing and high-performance vehicles. But the estate quickly stepped in, filing a lawsuit to block the use of his name. To them, it wasn't just about money. It was about maintaining control over how McQueen was remembered. They wanted to ensure that his legacy wasn't reduced to just another branding tool for corporations. But the legal battles didn't stop with outside companies. Even within McQueen's own family, disputes arose over how best to handle his legacy. His heirs found themselves at odds over how much of his name and image should be used for commercial gain. Some believed that McQueen's reputation should be carefully preserved, only allowing his likeness to be used in ways that aligned with his personal brand and values. Others saw an opportunity to capitalize on the continued fascination with his life, arguing that controlled licensing deals could both honor his legacy and generate revenue. This internal struggle led to legal fights over the management of his estate, with different factions arguing over the best way to balance respect for McQueen's image with the financial opportunities that came from his enduring popularity. Should his face appear in advertisements? Should his name be attached to new products? These were questions that had no simple answers, and they created divisions among those who had inherited control of his legacy. Despite these controversies, McQueen's estate has worked tirelessly to keep his image alive in a way that reflects who he was. Carefully curated documentaries, books, and merchandise have been released with the estate's approval, ensuring that his story continues to be told on their terms. His name remains synonymous with cool. His films are still celebrated as classics, and his rebellious spirit continues to inspire generations. But the fight over his legacy serves as a reminder of just how influential he was. Even in death, Steve McQueen remained a force to be reckoned with. His image so powerful that companies, family members, and legal teams all vied for control over it. In the end, his legend endures, not just because of the battles fought over his name, but because of the undeniable impact he left on Hollywood and beyond. Steve McQueen was more than just a Hollywood star. He was a legend, a rebel, and a man who played by his own rules. His raw talent and undeniable charisma made him an icon, but his relentless need for control and constant clashes with co-stars often made him an outcast. He left behind unforgettable performances, but also a legacy filled with rivalries, tension, and controversy. So, what do you think? Do these behind-the-scenes feuds change your view of McQueen? Was he a misunderstood genius, or just too difficult to work with? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood's King of Cool, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from Hollywood's golden era. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.